Did you hear that? It sounded so close. Oh, must be my imagination. Behind you. Run! This episode of Until Later Friends is brought to you by Yankee Candlelight. I'm not actually sponsored, but one can dream. Anyways, my spooky bit at the beginning aside, happy October. I hope that everyone is doing well and staying safe and healthy. It has been a spooktacular month thus far, and I just want to talk a little bit about how much I enjoy this month and I enjoy all the changes. I recently was back in Michigan to help with some family projects, and now I am back in Boston. I drove the whole day into dusk and into the dark and spooky evening, and it was so beautiful to see, especially in upstate New York, all of the colors. It was a sea of reds and golds and burnt oranges, and it was just so beautiful. And there were so many spooky moments as dusk approached, and I had two in particular that were quite bizarre. There was one moment on my trip back to Michigan where it was probably after midnight, and I had left a little later in the day, so I wasn't going to get home until 4 in the morning. And I was a little tired, and I had been listening to spooky stories, audiobooks to keep me awake, and because your boy gets nightmares quite easily. But I had been driving, and there were so many semis on the road because it was the weekend, so they were traveling where they needed to go. And this semi, they're very, very good about being cognizant of smaller vehicles and making sure to warn you when they are going to change lanes. Well, I was in the middle lane trying to pass the semi, and all of a sudden the semi came swerving towards me and almost pushed me into the middle divider. And I was spooked because it had taken me by surprise. There were only a few other vehicles in my vicinity. It was pitch black, no streetlights or anything because we're on the highway. And he scared me, so I had to slam on my brakes so that I wasn't sandwiched between the middle divider and the semi. And I look what made him swerve, and I had no idea. Well, because I had braked, I was slightly behind him, and I saw in the middle of upstate New York, it was just so bizarre. I'm sorry, it was Pennsylvania. There were trees all around and complete forest, and there hadn't been a rest stop for over 40 miles, so there was no buildings, no towns, nothing. It was pitch black, as I've mentioned. And 3 people came out of the woods and started going into the road, into the highway. And they looked like young people in pretty regular clothes. They were in hoodies, dark hoodies. But just the looks on their faces startled me. And they were just wandering into traffic. And it was so bizarre and scary. And I have no idea where they came from because they were literally miles away from any major area. I don't know if they were in a random small neighborhood or if they were hiking or whatever, but they did not look at all with it. So it was just scary. It was a really scary moment. And then on my trip back, that happened yesterday, I was in Pennsylvania again. Okay, state, got some creepy people. But I was very close to the end of my gas, and I wanted to stop off and go to a gas station. And in Pennsylvania, there's a lot of spaces on the highway towards Boston, which is I-90 East, that there are big bouts where there's no rest areas because of the pandemic. Everything's closed down. So I was getting pretty close and a little nervous and anxiety because my gas was less than 1/4 of a tank, and which I never usually do, but I was really trying to push and make good time. And so I stopped one exit too soon and got to this tiny little town that reminded me of a really famous video game / movie town called Silent Hill, which is always covered in fog and ash and is really scary and has this whole history of human sacrifice and scary things. Anyways, just those weird, bizarre pocket towns that aren't really overseen much by the government. And Stephen King has a book on this that Connor's read, and there's all sorts of stuff surrounding it. But main thing is this little tiny town that looked battered by the wind and broken by the snow in Pennsylvania. All the buildings had peeling paint. There was barely anyone out. There were houses that were boarded up. And in the town square, I guess, or the main stretch near the highway, there was this tiny little pocket-sized costume shop. And it had those gaudy streamers from the 1990s that are all glittery, that were bright orange, and it had spooky letters done by one of those paint markers that someone wrote by hand. And I'm sure it wasn't too bad of a costume shop, but the scariest thing was, as I was driving slowly trying to find my way back to the highway, and I had made a bit of a circle, when I passed it the first time, there was no one there. When I passed it the second time, to get back on the highway, this person came out completely dressed in black with a mask similar to a smiling woman. It was seen in a really popular franchise called the Purge movies, and there's a really prominent mask with round cheeks, red lips, and just this devilish grin. And this person in this baggy clothing, I couldn't tell how they identified based on their gender and their body, but was out there and was beckoning all the cars towards this costume shop. But it wasn't like a friendly beckon, it was just like a very slow, like, curling of the fingers. And again, this person was way too close to the road, almost could reach out and touch the cars, mine included. So it was spooky. So I noticed a few people swerved, and I saw this person, and I thought to myself, they are spooky. So thankfully, those are the spookiest things, very mild, about as high as my threshold is for spooky stuff. And it's just, it's interesting how one notices these things, especially around this time of year when it is framed under this commercial holiday that has very noble roots and has historical roots in paganism and nature and the doom and gloom. So that being said, I am just so fortunate that I'm safe and sound, and I can't tell everyone enough, enjoy your Halloween this year. Hopefully you'll get to do something fun, but be careful, and really, really relish in this autumn beauty. It is something that I think is really necessary for us right now. But I just want to tell you those two little spooky stories. Oh, and I also wanted to plug the scary stories that I've been listening to. They are historic and they are outdated. There are some very insensitive stuff in them, especially racial stuff, which I will admit to is very common in a lot of traditional English literature, which is not a good thing, and it doesn't make it okay. But thinking of the period, there were different mentalities for a lot of things that are not okay anymore and should never have been okay. That being said, there's an author named Algernon Blackwood, who I have just been loving his stories because they have to do with a slow burn psychological horror. They're all about the monstrosities that people are, and also the unknown and the elements of nature and the divine that people will never understand, and when they do, it's the destruction of them. So it's just a very scary, spooky thing, but he has free audiobooks with LibriVox that I think a lot of people would enjoy if you want something that's spooky and, like I said, is a slow burn, and really ties itself up at the end in a very quick and very, very sharp manner. Then definitely check him out. Anyways, that's enough from me. Again, everyone stay spooktacular. Be good and kind to one another. Get vaccinated, because the scariest thing is a bigot who's not vaccinated. And yeah, I'll talk to you soon. Until later, friends. Love you. Bye.